So I was thinking during the week, back to when I was learning how to drive. Now, I was a bit of a late bloomer. I got my Ps when I was in my early 20s. And look, I think I'm a pretty good driver. Some people might disagree with that. Look, that's okay. I'm big enough to sort of handle differing opinion around this. But I still remember the first time I got behind the wheel of our 1996 Toyota Tarago in my driveway there at my parents' place in Campbelltown. And I thought, I'm going to be fine. I've played Gran Turismo 3 on my PlayStation. I've got this all down pat, and I sat down, column shift down, and as I was driving out of the driveway, my first thought was, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I remember thinking, I'm never going to get the hang of this. But sure enough, here I am. I can jump into a car and drive around now, sort of without really thinking about it. And I mention this because I'm sure you've had, like me, these moments, you know, when you're driving somewhere, and all of a sudden you go, oh, I'm driving. Where am I? Where am I going? You realise you've sort of been daydreaming or something, and you've kind of completely forgotten that you're driving a car. You think, have I crashed into somebody? Where am I? Am I still on the road? Not that you're falling asleep or anything, but you just get into autopilot mode, and you can't remember sort of where you are, where you've been, where you're going. You have these moments of sort of clicking into autopilot, right? And so as we continue in this Connect series, week 2 of Connect, and look, I'm sure this is something that no one can relate to. This is probably just me, nice chance for me to share and be vulnerable with you all. But I know I've had times in my life when I've gone into autopilot mode at church, and particularly autopilot mode when it comes to saying the creed. We jump up after the homily, which I'm sure you've all thoroughly enjoyed, as you always would, and we crack into the creed. You know, we have the creed, and the creed has these 4 articles, and that's kind of what we're making our way through Connect. That God is Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and the Church, these 4 articles of belief that we have in the creed. And so we start saying the creed, and maybe we're on autopilot, maybe not, maybe just me, I don't know. And before you know it, we've zoomed past the first few lines, and it's only when we start talking about Jesus and using big words like consubstantial, and then all of a sudden we're bowing, and then we're not bowing, we kind of wake up and realise what we're kind of doing. We start paying attention. And part of that, I think, is we probably take the first few lines of the creed as given, that we can kind of take them for granted, see them as relatively uncontroversial. But what I do want to suggest this morning is that these first few lines about God the Father might seem uncontroversial, but they contain some of the most revolutionary truths about God that we have. And last week, Father Chris invited us to make the creed more controversial rather than less controversial. And whilst it might seem self-evident to us, 2,000 years after Christ, for the ancients there was nothing more controversial than the claim that God is Father, particularly in the way that the creed means it. Whilst for the people of Israel, the use of Father when talking about God is not unheard of. We see it and we hear it in the Psalms, as well as throughout the prophetic literature at different times. This designation of God as Father was much more in a metaphorical sense than anything else. That God is Father insofar as He is Creator. That His fatherness is a temporal reality, it's an analogous one. That God stands in relation to creatures as their origin in the same way that a father stands in relation to his children. And look, in one sense, it's really important to recognize that we can speak of God as Father in this way. We're not saying we shouldn't. That God is our Father in the sense that He's our Creator. Let's break open what we're talking about a little bit more when we say this. When we say that in the Creed that God is the maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. These words make clear 2 key points. That in the face of a dualism or a hyper-spiritualism that views the spiritual side of things as good and the physical, material side of things as evil, the Creed makes clear that God, as Creator, has made all things good. Both the material world and the spiritual world are made good, that they're good things. That God has made all things good and has given them into the hands of humanity to care for and to use for the good of all. Yes, in the reality of the fall, we experience these things in complicated ways, but they're inherently good. And this is an important point to remember as we continue to reflect on the care of our common home as we wrap up Laudato Si week in the life of the church. On the flip side, our second key point is that in the face of a kind of humanism that views the material world as all that there is and denies the existence of spiritual things and of transcendence, the Creed reminds us of the fundamental truth of spiritual realities, that we're created with a body and a body-soul composite, that we're both physical and spiritual beings. And to deny the spiritual is to deny what it really means to be fully human, that the spiritual is no less real than the physical. Before we return to our discussion of God as Father, there's one more important thing to note, and that's this, that the creative action of God is not something that's consigned to history, as if God is some kind of divine watchmaker who sets things in motion, and once it's all kind of set up, he sits back on his couch, cracks open a cold one and just watches the world unfold before him in sort of this passive sort of a way. Rather, there's a deep connection between God's creative power and his capacity to shape the events of human history. That creation is the constant and present activity of God. That God is the world's beginning, yes, but not once long ago, but in every moment. Luke Johnson says that the Christian confession of God as creator is not a theory of how things came to be, but a perception of how everything is still and is always coming into being. That the whole of creation, the whole of humanity, and each and every one of us individually is being held in being at every moment by the Father who made us out of love. That God is holding you in existence each and every moment of each and every day. And that far from being distant and passive and uninvolved, it speaks beautifully of a God who is intimately cares for us and loves us deeply. And so we've discussed what it means for God to be the Father, for the Father to be creator. And if we stop there at this metaphorical, analogous sense of God as Father, I think we miss something really important, that we're missing the point. Because what the Creed is really claiming is deeper than this. The Creed is saying that God is not Father in a temporal, analogous sense, but rather through Jesus Christ, God has been revealed as the eternal Father. That when Jesus claims and speaks of God as Father, he's not doing so metaphorically, but rather he's claiming to share in God's nature, and in doing so of being co-equal with the Father. And Jesus reveals to us the very nature of God as Father, and Father for all eternity. That in saying God the Father, the Creed states as briefly as possible the precise character of God as revealed by Jesus Christ. And in how Jesus speaks of the Father throughout his earthly ministry, he reveals not only the nature of his relationship with the Father, but the nature of the Father himself. Jesus speaks of and reveals a Father who blesses all things with goodness, who cares for all, who has a special care for his little ones and for the ignorant, for the poor and the marginalised, who knows our needs, who provides for us, who forgives sins, who rewards, and much, 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 much more. Yet it's not the words of Jesus that reveal the Father to us most clearly, but rather the actions of Jesus. We see most clearly the nature of the Father and his love for us in his relationship with Jesus himself. A Father who loves the Son with a self-emptying, self-sacrificial love, who gives everything out of love for the Son. And what does Jesus say to us? As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. That in Jesus' life, his death and his resurrection, he reveals the heart of the Father for each and every one of us. And it's this love of the Father, the love in the heart of Jesus which impels Jesus to the cross. And it's in his dying and rising that Jesus, through our baptism, has called us into the eternal sonship of Christ. That through his death, we might come to be daughters and sons of this same eternal Father. St. Paul tells us that we have been given a spirit of adoption, calling God Abba, Father, just like Jesus, in the very same way as Jesus. And when the disciples asked Jesus to teach them how to pray, he instructs them to pray like this, saying, Our Father. Jesus is saying something and pointing to something radical here, that through adoption we become sons and daughters of God, sons in the Son. As St John says in his first letter, he says, "See what love the Father has given us, that we shall be called children of God, and so we are." And so we are. So as we say the Creed this week, let's take a moment to turn off the autopilot mode. Don't gloss over the first few lines to get to Jesus in big words and bows, but take a moment to reflect on this fundamental truth, that Jesus reveals God as Father and Creator, who has created us, who knows us, and who loves us. Take a moment to truly claim this revolutionary truth, that the Eternal Father is your Father, is our Father, not just analogously or metaphorically, but through the grace of baptism, we are daughters and sons of God the Father, who has created us, who loves us and holds us in being at every single moment. That we would see what love the Father has given us, that we should be called children of God, and so we are. Amen.